Hi, this is Paula Glory, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. Today we're going to go into a topic that merits the very deepest of investigation, especially here in New York City, but also throughout the country. And that's the topic of homelessness and how we can address the topic of homelessness. I'm going to be on this excursion down the rabbit hole with two producers at Manhattan Neighborhood Network and also a lady who is an expert on the field of homelessness and really opened my eyes up about what's going on here in New York City. So I would like to welcome all of you to the show. On my far left is Robert Taylor, and Robert is the host of The Movement. And also he is the director of the food pantry at Tompkins Square.
It's Bread of Life Ministries.
Bread of Life Ministries.
Tompkins Square Gospel Fellowship.
Yeah, that's a wonderful operation there.
Absolutely. We feed over 150 families every week. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful program.
Great. And I like how you and the pastor speak to people when they're waiting and they're all stressed out because they're, needing food in this way. And it's just so welcoming. And at the same time, you also, address that issue of to overcome the shame and also to help here.
Exactly.
So to balance the two, not to say that this bandage makes it okay, but that we're dealing with the situation at hand and we have a vision for something more.
That is absolutely correct. What we try to do, briefly if you don't mind, is make sure that, based on my past experiences, a couple of things happen. I'm a Christian, and my mandate is to assist the poor in any way possible. And we go a little further. It has to be done with graciousness. And we try to remove the stigma of being poor and being treated less than a human being.
Right.
And I mentioned you'll go to a place where you can get the gospel and no food, or food and the gospel, or you might be able to get both, but when you walk out of there, you feel like you just left motor vehicles or something. And so we really focus on how we handle people, and I think we do a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Pretty good job.
And I enjoyed the show that I made, of you and the pastor speaking. And I also actually went down for one of the people for Big Mike because he had some kind of hearing.
Yes.
And that was an eye-opener for me, too.
Yes.
So anyway, without further ado, Laurie McNeil, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And it was really the comments that you made after a shoot that really got me thinking and wanting to learn more, because you work for Urban Justice. Can you?
Yes, I'm the Director of Research and Policy at Urban Justice Center, and we're a direct legal advocacy organization. And so we operate, I think we're up to 9 legal clinics in the city, primarily soup kitchens and food pantries. And we have, an established weekly schedule, and we see clients for issues specifically dealing with cash assistance, food stamps, Medicaid issues. What tends to happen in the New York City welfare system is that individuals are able to initially apply for public benefits, or what we think about as welfare, the more common term. But keeping the welfare benefits over time is the trickier thing. And so we have a system really at the federal level that rewards the reduction of cases within cities. And so the state then is able to benefit financially by having fewer people on welfare. So there's a system really of being perpetually cut off from welfare for really no reasons, for following the rules, recertifying, doing all of the things that you're supposed to do to keep the benefits. And these people are impoverished. It's an impoverished population. They're eligible for the benefits, but keeping them is in some cases next to impossible. So what we do is we employ center-based advocacy, working with the job centers in the city so that people can keep their benefits, or if need be, going to a formal fair hearing and advocating at that level, which is a state level.
Wow, there's so much we need to throw light on. And finally, we have Netwood to keep me honest here. And Nat is the producer and the host of 29 frames a minute.
30 frames a second.
30 frames, excuse me.
Editor, you should know better.
30 frames a second? I thought it was 29 all this time. Oh yeah, 30, okay.
It's 30 frames a second. Well, actually it's 29.95 or something. But it's, yeah, that's, you're an editor, you should know that. Yeah, I'm the producer, not so much the host, in that 30 frames a second really doesn't have a host.
It's sort of high art.
It's, it makes an attempt to leave me out of the equation and allow people to speak for themselves. Now, I do direct and help produce a few other shows that deal with issues of you know, concerns in the poor community, certainly concerns in the black community. Community Cop, the Florence M. Rice Show, Ancestor House. But 30 frames a second does not have a host. We sort of get out in the street and in some sort of documentary format, I guess is the correct way to put it, although I'm not sure, with sort of an aberration, present it to the public.
Sort of public access documentary style?
Yeah, it. I like to say we're not the voice of the voiceless. We sort of bring a mic to the micless, you know. And they pretty much have a pretty good voice of their own.
And what do you hope to accomplish by bringing these images in front of people? Because you're the longest standing public access producer here.
Well, at this table.
Yeah, at this table.
I'm probably...
what keeps you going?
Because I'm presenting myself, because there's no problem that I've ever presented that I have not been faced with. Because people need access to opportunity. People need a shot. And all of those opportunities are being snatched away or left to dry up like a raisin in the sun, so to speak. And I take it personal. Because I've had to face every demon that I shine a light on.
So you're not saying to the viewer to do something you haven't done yourself,
no,
or faced yourself?
No. And people are incredible, and a lot of people who could do tremendous things find themselves without finance or opportunity or places to go. If we can in some small way
hear them, see them,
get the pendulum to swing just a little bit from time to time, then it's worth the trip.
Laurie, specifically what you were talking about was the statistics that you gather, and what really opened my eyes was you said that there's a group of people that fall in the cracks and aren't served. And later on, Robert and Sandra took me to a Picture the Homeless event in the Bronx, and I videotaped you, and you reiterated exactly what she said. So do you remember that, talking about who?
Well, if I'm remembering the conversation that you're referring to, I think we were talking about the homeless population specifically and access to welfare benefits. Mm-hmm. And one thing, we're in the middle of a large-scale extensive research project, so we don't have all of the information analyzed yet. However, what we're seeing is that the profile of the individual who is most likely to have their welfare case closed, and that's important because if your welfare case is closed, if you don't have an active public assistance case open, you can even lose your shelter slot because there's no city reimbursement. And so, I mean, when you think about being thrown out of a shelter, for example, and it happens because you don't have an open PA case. And so what happens is because this group of individuals who are primarily male, 45 to 52 was the age range that the research had supported, of shelter homeless. What happens is that these thousands of notices are sent out by the Human Resource Administration every week to cut off people's cases. You have to respond to that notice within 10 days. What happens is the homeless population, the shelter homeless population, doesn't have an address, and what they usually will have, our clients will usually have their mail sent to a particular shelter, but it may not be the shelter that they're actually at that particular time or staying at. And so what happens is that by the time they get that notice, their case has already been closed. And once their case is closed, it takes another 30 days to reopen it. And so you only have 10 days to respond to that notice. And what we found in talking to the homeless population, most homeless are able to access their mail about every 2 weeks. And so it's been a really big problem in the community, because, you know, not only are you losing then your shelter allowance, the money that's going to a nonprofit or a private organization to provide the shelter, you're also losing health benefits, you're losing any kind of food allowance, and so in that case you really are down and out.
Well, Robert, I know you were probably younger than that age group she's talking about, but I was so it just opened my eyes so much when you were describing that you used to think, how can people stay on the street so long until it happened to you? And you're so well-spoken and refined, and you know, it just speaks of such a solid background, you know, good family and so on, and yet it happened to you. What that Laurie said sort of strikes you that maybe you could elaborate on for the sake of my audience, who probably doesn't really understand deeply what you're talking about?
I was so glad when she was speaking that the camera was on her, because just listening to you kind of took me back to my own personal situation. I was homeless for 10 years. And what strikes me about the statistics, well, first of all, I was a little younger, but I am a male, obviously. I fall into that category. Most of my contact on the streets were with people of color, men of color. And I can tell you, as difficult as it was to be homeless for so many years, what was even more difficult was trying to get out of it. Some of these situations that I had to deal with when I was on public assistance, not receiving a cutoff notice and all of a sudden no benefits. And it was just so hard to get out.
Kind of catch-22.
It was. It's just a vicious cycle of stay exactly where you're at. Many of these situations encourage you to either stay where you're at or jump off the ship, so to speak. And I found that's, year after year, as I attempted to get out of my situation, I found myself either back where it started from or worse. And so you kind of, you become discouraged. And there was really no incentive, and that's another thing, there was really no incentive and no support to moving forward in your life. If I attempted to get a job to supplement what I was getting, at times I was in a shelter. And when I say homeless, I should be a little more specific. I mean, I literally lived in parks through all kinds of weather. If it got really, really bad and I couldn't take it, I might have been in a subway or in a doorway.
But you avoided the shelters because you said they were
absolutely,
dangerous.
Like the plague. Oh yeah, I've seen people get killed, shot.
Right. You said they were dealing drugs, and if people weren't paying, they'd throw them off the window?
Oh, yeah, this is absolutely... Actually, they did a movie about that, Fort Washington Men's Shelter, where the security team, they were the drug dealers. They were, if they weren't directly dealing, they would enforce the drug dealers that were there. And if you didn't pay, there was a population of clients who were mentally ill. And they were in a program called the CSS program. They used to receive Social Security. You know, some of them as much as $1,000+ a month. So they were constantly being victimized. They were targets. I'd see them laid out in the bathroom, broken nose, broken arm, all their money gone. It was just worse than being in jail. You know, at least in jail there was some kind of structure. You had COs that you might get lucky and might prevent you from being harmed. But this was just open season on the least of them.
Wow. I mean, Nat, when he's speaking, that strikes me as a whole world people don't know about. And as public access producers, do you think we have a responsibility to show it? And then if we do, how do we show it so that we can show it in such a way that's constructive and not horrifying, and people turn the channel? Do you have any?
Well, the short answer is no. I don't think, by definition, public access producers have a responsibility to do anything for anyone. I think the good thing about public access is that it allows an opportunity for everyone to get involved. And so many of the access producers get involved because they've either undergone a long and arduous road from point A to point B themselves, or because they honestly care. So there's an honesty to it. They don't do what they do because there's some mandate from public access or there's some rating scheme. By and large, I think the reason why public access has taken off the way it has in recent years is just that reason, because now people actually see themselves as opposed to some
fringe group.
Well, fantasy land thing. It's not reality. It's real.
You mean as opposed to the early days when Ugly George was doing his thing, and that lady who was doing dope and saying Crystal, whatever her name was, just crazy stuff.
Public access was just that, just something crazy to watch in the middle of the night.
Not that that doesn't have its benefit too, but...
And we still have some crazy stuff to watch in the middle of the night. We didn't kick out Crazy in the middle of the night, and I watch Crazy in the middle of the night, in the middle of some nights.
But it's a people, is what you're saying. It's an authentic, it's a real thing.
Correct.
But the public access producers are growing to show real problems, or if there's no mandate to do it, we don't have a responsibility to do it, and yet it seems we're growing into doing it, or the viewers want it.
Yes, to all of the things that you just said. That the viewership has grown because of it. That people who are real people with real concerns, bringing real concerns of other people, are doing it. So there's a sincerity about it. When Robert was speaking, I mean, before he started speaking, I was thinking the exact same thing, and he articulated it so well. The challenge is not being homeless. You can survive anything if you're thrust into it. The challenge is, how do you get back home? And they have, it is
You mean you're on a track, kind of?
You're always on a track. You're always on a track. You always want to move back from point A to point B. But you have to be in a certain place just to be able to land a job. No matter how smart you are, no matter how eager you are to work. If you do not have a home address, if you do not have good health care, if you cannot walk into a place of employment and look presentable, it is impossible for you to get a job. So it is the ultimate catch-22. You reach a place where there is no coming back, irrespective of the fact that you are more than prepared to work. And the worst part of it is that the whole world is calling you names and making you feel worse about yourself because they are calling you bum and you don't want to work and yada 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 yada, and that's not the case. So to see someone like Robert spend 10 years homeless and come back means that he is one magnificent warrior.
Right.
My hat's off to you, brother.
Well, thank you.
My hat's off to you, brother, because you got to be a warrior too.
I don't, I went through a living hell out there. I can honestly say that if God were to give me an example of what hell might look like, I think I saw it already. And no, I don't want to be there. But I want to respond to your question, which was, I believe, is there a way to shine the light on issues such as this?
As public access producers.
As public access producers. And you also said it, you phrased it, can we do this in a, what was it, not so ugly way?
Well, in such a way that people don't change the channel.
Right.
And in such a way that after they've seen whatever you're presenting, they're richer for it and feeling more capable of addressing it, well, even if it's just to open the heart.
That's very difficult, and I believe it takes a combination of things to achieve those goals. I will say that when you start digging into this particular issue of homelessness, it may lead you to look at a couple of things. Our economy,
I should hope so.
Ethnic relationships, the effects of our economy on people of color, education. When you start looking at the bigger picture, I peeked into it. I'm not an expert on it, but I will say that there are some hints to, how can I say it? Well, as you know, capitalism means that there are going to be victims. That's just the bottom line. There are victims of a capitalized society. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. And if that is true, the winners want to win, and they want to make sure the losers lose. And I'm going to share with you my personal beliefs that none of this is an accident. When you go to places like Trinity Soup Kitchen and you see 95% of the men that are on that line are men of color, that's not an accident. That is not an accident. And this is, to answer your question, probably not. I don't know a way that you reveal the ugly truth without it being ugly. I don't know how you make the ugly
well, what
truth
about
pretty.
But what about if you say it's a race thing, that there's more black people in the soup lines?
I think it's more.
What about as more white people wind up in that position?
Like?
Do you think that's going to create
It's like you set a mouse trap and you catch a water bug. You know what I mean? The trap was set for the mouse, but you're going to catch a couple of water bugs. And then and then you can also look at once the greedy get greedier, and when they start running out of victims, they start looking for other victims, and that happens to be the middle class, because poor people are probably pretty much where they're at. We've taken care of the fact that for the most part, the majority will not get a good education. Those who do, we're going to educate you and teach you how to work. We're going to teach you about work. We're not going to teach you about wealth. We're going to teach you about work. We're not going to teach you how to own businesses. We're going to teach you how to labor and how to stay exactly where you're at. And I always laugh in forums like this, because we never want to get underneath to that ugly truth. And if you look at the history of the country, of this particular country, it's there. It's always in our face.
But isn't something richer when all are included? Like my experience at public access, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't even know what knowledge to search for if I had, every professor I could possibly hire, every topic I could possibly dream of that I would want to learn, as opposed to just coming in here and paying attention to what's close to other people's hearts and what they're producing. I've grown so much, and I've seen that the most profound shows are shows that have a connection with who's behind the camera, as well as the topic that's being considered in front of the camera, which means you're richer for more diversity being included. So if the capitalism has to have victims, I'm so convinced that we can restructure an economic paradigm to address that, because I think the reality of what's more successful is not a reality of victims.
Well,
do you believe that? That there have to be people on top and on the bottom?
There's a couple of things that I have to point out. Public access, as we speak, M&N does not have an agreement. Public access is under stress like everything else that is not mega rich. And if it was just a question of dealing with the greedy, it would be somewhat simpler if the rules were uniform. But in point of fact, they cheat. The cards are marked, the dice is loaded, and house always wins. 15 years ago, before Clinton left office and signed over the world to the banks, the entire planet was levered 10 to 1. That means that they were loaning out $10 for every dollar of real money, quote unquote real money they had. They created instruments, the banks created instruments, collateralized debts and schemes and scams that now has the planet in debt to the tune of $720 trillion. And there's only about, which is funny since all the wealth and resources of the planet come to about $53 trillion when it's levered 10 to 1, which means there's only about $5 trillion worth of actual assets in the world. The bottom line is that the prices we pay are artificial. The only purpose that they served was to make bankers and hedge fund operators richer.
But the pendulum swings so far, and then you're back to just little community businesses.
Mathematically, $720 trillion is not doable. If they took back every dime from every human being on the face of the earth for the next 1,000 years, they couldn't pay that.
It just seems like that point in the Monopoly game when I was a kid where you just mess everything up because it's just not working.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
Somebody's got all the money and it's just no more fun to play.
Again, how do you, I mean, it's no longer just the poor. You were so lucky when it was just poor black people. But the pendulum has swung. They have gotten so greedy that everybody is due.
Poor everything. The Asians at the food pantry.
Yeah, when you talk about rent structures that are $1,000 a month and classified as affordable, you're talking a whole lot of money. I mean, when you're talking about $250 a week in rent, you have to have a pretty good job to just like set that aside and still have enough money for food, clothes, transportation, education, and a future for your children. It's just not doable. In point of fact, we are facing a time that is indeed a major paradigm shift. And I don't see how it's doable. When it was just a war on the poor, it was one thing, but now it's a war on anything that is not rich.
I wanted to address, Laurie, you touched me because you said you came from a welfare background and now you're a PhD. Did that affect you to study in the way that you did?
It did. What I found as a child, when you're a poor child, is that you're invisible. And so when you're invisible, what happens though is, of course it's painful, but what happens is it gives you a different kind of perspective, because people, when you're poor and you're a child, behave the way that they would behind closed doors, because they don't have to put on any pretenses for you. And so my PhD is in sociology, so what we do is it's the study of society.
You mean nobody's putting on a pretext to impress you because they see you in their...
You're not worth it. You're not worth it. And you don't have to be like that public actor. You can be like that person who, once you close your apartment door at night, you can just like let it all down. And so what happened is I realized as a child I was watching people and watching how they acted and how they interacted. And my parents did not graduate from high school. They had like a 6th grade education, and so I didn't really know things about like college. How do you go to college? How do you start that process? And of course my parents weren't able to help me because they didn't know either. And so when I found that there was actually something you could do in college called sociology, which was exactly what I was doing this whole time, was looking at individuals and interactions. And so for me then that was really exciting. I'm like, I could maybe get a job at this. And so this is something I could maybe even do. And so I started doing started that track and decided to just keep going. And so yes, that gives me a different perspective in how I understand welfare, and I've been a professor for 10 years. And in talking to students, explaining the depth of hunger. I was never homeless, but my whole childhood, I can hardly remember a time when I wasn't hungry. And trying to explain a kind of hunger that never goes away, and reading about hunger in a book, reading about it just to try to be satisfied, reading about food and imagining that you were eating, and it was those kinds of experiences, and then trying to relay that information to other populations. I taught on Long Island, so it's a very privileged area economically, and trying to convey that to students became very important to me. And now my research kind of dovetails that same marginalized group of individuals, and so it continues to be something.
So the comment I made must have struck you. You're not a public access producer, but some way to take a story and to show it to people who are not involved in that story in such a way that...
My feeling is if you really want to show a story, tell a story, visual, whatever medium you're using, I don't think that you have to sugarcoat it so that the middle class and the upper class will turn it off, or that you're concerned that they'll turn away. I think you make it exactly as it is, and if it's ugly, then that's what it is.
But the thing is you're not ugly. That's what I mean. Because you wouldn't want to do it if you didn't feel that these people were worth it. And it's not so much that they need your help. That's why, Robert, I really liked how you were talking about at the food pantry, that you don't make people feel ashamed that they're needing the food, and that you're saying this is part of what we need to deal with as we move along towards greater prosperity, so that this is a temporary situation for you. I
decided many years ago that I was going to put my money where my mouth was, and as often as I could, use my experience to not only encourage people who may be in my situation, but to inform those who are uninformed, those who looked at me when I was on the street as this worthless bum who would never be of any use, and looked at me in a way that they couldn't understand how a person could be like that, like I was before I became homeless. But do you know, I'm going back to what you said about how to do this without it being ugly, and I was thinking, I can't remember a time when there was
Excuse me, it's not so much about ugly, it's about overwhelming.
Okay,
so that you make people feel...
Paula, can't remember the times, looking back in my mind, the history of this country, where any major change for people happened and it wasn't ugly. The more I think about it, it's not possible, which is one of the reasons why some of these situations continue to be that way, the way they are. When you look at the civil rights movement, that was horrible. Yeah. But the only way for change to take place is for people to literally see. They had to see it. They had, and not only that, they had to see the fact that you too can become a victim. Because I'm going to tell you, when I think public opinion began to change, it's almost like you had whites over here and you had blacks over here, and there I believe, at least here in the North, that there was a good majority of white people that were like, this is not right, but wouldn't do anything. When you began to see white women, white men being hosed down in the street with these black people, I believe public opinion began to change, because you too can be a victim. You too can be harmed by this thought process. And my point is that no, I believe that the truth has to be the truth and has to be presented in the way that it is, because it is what it is until it ain't. It's ugly, it's disgusting, it's hard to swallow, but I didn't make the truth. Don't hate me because I'm telling you the truth like it is. I wish I didn't have to sit here and mention racism, economic racism, racism against people of color who are trying to get a decent apartment, trying to get a decent job, trying to get a decent education. It is no accident. And if you can look at these situations and think anything other than that, then I would ask you to prove it to me, because I don't think it's a coincidence that you can go in any urban area in New York City, and the majority of the time you will find a bad school. Any ghetto in New York City where I can't go in your neighborhood and find a 50-cent can of beer. And then it's amazing, in my neighborhood I look at the delivery of the beer, and I look in the truck and it says, something like West Hill, New Jersey. Somewhere up, they're actually bringing this stuff in from another state, loading our community up with it. And so you have a whole community of drunk people, drunk kids. They're in my community, but they're not in yours. And no one ever asks the question, well, how is that possible? Why? Well, first of all, it's made available and it's very cheap. So you take your situation, it's not so good, it's not so pleasant, and you put a temporary painkiller right in front of somebody and say, we're going to make it easy for you to buy this and kill some pain, the myth of killing pain. These are not accidents. So what's the source? Why are there 50-cent cans of beer in my neighborhood, not yours? Why is there marijuana and crack all over my community, not yours? What, drug dealers don't want to sell drugs to rich, middle-class people? Of course they do. But they would never allow it to happen. You would never see drug dealers standing on Madison Avenue every other corner selling crack and cocaine and 50-cent beers and 72nd and Madison Avenue. Why are they able to stop it there, but not in my community? This is not an accident.
I actually think that storytelling is a matter of perspective, that every story has a protagonist and an antagonist. And it's up to you to establish who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. And you cannot arbitrarily change reality if you're dealing with reality-based television. Recently, we did a program on the Congo. You can't sugarcoat the Congo. You cannot sugarcoat Sierra Leone. You cannot sugarcoat cutting the arms and the legs off of children to steal diamonds and sell guns and form armies out of 8-year-old boys and girls. You cannot sugarcoat the mutilation of women and the rape of women, and I mean, there's no way you can sugarcoat it. What you can do is show the victims as human beings worthy of respect. Mm-hmm. That you can make them the protagonist as opposed to just the background prop. That is our challenge, to make human beings, to make the viewer see the humanity of the people that we're referring to, and to understand that there, but for the grace of God go I. Like I said before, there's a whole new paradigm shift, and everyone is up for victimization now. And I do not think that people, by and large, are as inhumane as the media would like you to believe. That if given an opportunity to see more, to learn more, to understand more, they would jump at that opportunity.
To reach out and help more?
To understand, to help, to wonder what we could do. I mean, Haiti has been a hellhole since God knows when. But when the media decided that they would show the Haitians as human beings so that other human beings could understand their plight, by and large, people wanted to rush out and help the people of Haiti. It's difficult to get your funds through a very corrupt system and a corrupt government. But it's not because of the fact that people are just monsters and don't care. They're not presented with the facts. But if you present people with the facts, if you do more than just dumb down people, and that is an act of aggression.
To dumb down people?
To dumb down people. That, you know, that's not just coincidental. That's a definite act of aggression in dumbing down people. So it's a war.
Or it might be a plan to sell armaments and get, you know, antagonisms going.
If the plan is simply to keep people docile, so that they make no move to better themselves and their surroundings, it's still an act of aggression.
You mean docile like 50-cent cans of beer to keep people?
No, I mean docile like all I want to see is Sex in the City, and I don't want to see stories about child prostitution, and I don't want to see stories about homeless, and I don't want to see stories about the mutilation of young girls and young boys. Docile in the fact that we teach nothing about life to ourselves and our children. We just show them cartoons and people eating bugs. When you render people ignorant, when you deliberately render people ignorant so that they cannot defend themselves, so they cannot better themselves, that is a definite act of aggression towards them. And when it's not...
So how do you get the opportunity that you can see people? I remember once I was at Union Square selling some 9/11 books, and this guy was sort of humored by me, I think, and he was... previously would have been a pretty scary looking guy to me. He had dreadlocks and he was very handsome, and he said he was going to tell me about Vietnam, what was really going on in Vietnam. And he looks to one side and another like still somebody's looking over his shoulder, and explains to me something with the Delta and heroin struggling. And then he sort of putting the moves on me, but he's a handsome guy. And I'm kind of relaxing a little bit that, you know, he's another human being. And then he starts to lay it on so thick, his plight and what he went through, and how he was, his girlfriend, when he went for the second stint in Vietnam, her mother said, forget this guy, leave him. And all of a sudden I got into his story so deeply, and I remember looking at the pavement, and I just felt in such deep despair. And he's going, it's like he was trying to go, whoa, you know, I didn't want you to empathize. He didn't say those words, but you can just go into it so deeply. Now, I'm glad I had that experience because he's not a scary person anymore. But how could I, as a producer of TV, give that rich a moment that happened to me?
I think you just did.
Oh yeah, right.
And that is the point. We all go through spouts of depression. We deal with some heavy issues, but by and large, we all get up and we all do our job and we all try to make it better. Every once in a while, we win one.
In other words, that this is a human being. It's not the poor or this age group.
And that the struggle does indeed continue. The fight still goes on. No matter what he has gone through, there are others coming up that might be spared going through that same scenario and granted, we are out-mediated, we are out-moneyed, we are out-muscled, we are outgunned, And yet somehow through all of it,
our story,
once in a while,
our story gets out.
Once in a while, somebody gets saved. That would not get saved if we just like allowed ourselves to be mired in depression and never got
What do you mean by saved as opposed to what Robert might mean by saved? Because I know when I wrote my little letter, you said that the limitations of my background were apparent, and I wanted to do another show. This wasn't this show, about the black church based on some things I had learned. What does it mean to be saved?
I don't mean like Jesus saves. I mean like
Robert, I'm turning this one over to you.
Urban justice. Okay. Well, you can
No. But I'm saying I know whatever you say, I won't be qualified.
Urban justice. One person, whether she knows it or not, at least one or two people, kids, will one day go to college, and one day have opportunities that they would not have had if a young girl who was hungry most of the time didn't grow up to be a PhD. It's more and more difficult to do that. And I don't know if she could have done the same thing if she was growing up today that she was able to do when she was growing up at that time. It's more and more difficult. More and more, a lot of kids need a few more mentors, a few more lights at the end of the tunnel. When I say getting saved, I'm saying that one or two people, and Robert may not know who the heck they are, may never know, but one or two people are gonna look at this guy and see what he's doing, and find a way to fight through their conditions. And
you mean conditions that, like, Laurie wouldn't be in despair about it, but keep moving?
Conditions that without Laurie they would be destroyed. Conditions like without a Robert they would be destroyed. Conditions like without a Florence Rice they would be destroyed. No, she will not turn around homelessness, and he will not turn around homelessness single-handedly, though I am sure that they would love to just wave their little wand and make it all go away. But I honestly believe that because of what they do, one or two people will make it through, and they'll take one or two more with them.
What did it for you, Laurie?
To turn it around?
To get out of that welfare cycle, or to be hungry and...
Well, for me, I found solace in books. And we didn't have television. We grew up, it was actually on a chicken farm. And for me, it was a mental escape. And so I could read about other kinds of existences. I knew that the kind of life that my family and I had wasn't, quote, the normal. Of course, that's relative, right? Mm-hmm. But I knew that there were other things out there. There was something bigger. And of course, as Nate suggested, mentors, teachers, people who believe in you, who push you forward when you don't have the energy to push yourself forward, who can, and you're absolutely right. You need more and more and more of them, and the more like eggs in the proverbial basket that you have and resources, then the much more likely you are to be that one that is saved and gets through, and then hopefully, as you suggested, pulling more through as well.
Robert, you were inspired, or the wave passed, or?
I don't know, Paula. I was just listening and remembering when I was, I think, in the 4th grade, and I heard this wonderful story about Christopher Columbus when he came over here. It was the most laid out in the book so beautifully, and how he discovered America, and was so. And then I got older, and I did a little investigating, and found out about the dogs and the murders and the Indians, and so do we have enough of media that will sugarcoat and ignore major issues? Do we have enough media that will try to put a happy face? I look at it's going on now. Look at the Obama Backlash. and where it's coming from. And, you know, it's, of course, if you don't want to see the truth, what you would think is it's just a coincidence that most of this pushback is coming from the Deep South. Just happens to be that way. That's how it happened. But a person, the theory, well, I mean, it's been my experience that history has proved that Obamas are not supposed to make it. He was never supposed to make it. He was never supposed to go that high. And I'm reminded of OJ, because he was never supposed to beat the system, because the systems were set up for you. You are going to fail every time you try to use these systems, for the most part, every time. And it was like a smack in the face of the powers that be. And I remember, out of all the focus was for that entire year after the verdict of whether he did it or not. Meanwhile, in the background, the Republicans had convinced Bill Clinton, and they called it, what do they call it? White man's revenge. They went after welfare, public assistance. That was their answer. In the state where he won this verdict, immediately after, $3 billion were allotted to build more prisons. These are all coincidences. And I just say to you this, and
the OJ trial has a lot of aspersions on it. First of all, I've learned about DNA, and from a DNA expert. The lack thereof. DNA is not conclusive. I mean, it's absolutely shocking. The other thing is cameras in the court. That was something else based on grandstanding. They eliminated that. That could have ensured a lot of justice. We have one fellow producer. Did you know Posar when he was around?
Oh, of course.
Well, Posar was banned from here for 5 years. I'm starting to work with him again because of the cannabis cancer cure. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the OJ trial was important.
And I just want to make it clear, at least from my perspective, Paula, and some, if I seem agitated, it's not toward you, but it's toward the conversation that could be happening. My issue is cancer. I don't know how you make cancer pretty. If I'm discussing cancer, it's an ugly disease. So as a physician, I want to show you the effects of smoking. I'm going to show you the results of lung cancer. When I show you this picture, that's going to be ugly. Hopefully, the truth will inform you and keep you from smoking. And I look at what's going on.
I'm not sure smoking causes cancer, well, but anyway.
Okay, that's a whole different discussion.
I know.
But if you do
see
make
your
that
point.
connection, so my point is that no, you can't. I don't see a way that you do this. And yes, there are people who want to see people like me dead off this earth and not in this country. Take your pick. Yes, they are. And if you don't believe me, you go online and look at some of the skinhead websites. And then how do you abstract that?
I know.
These people work. Yeah. These people are politically connected. These people are in our schools. They are in our businesses. To convince me that none of this is relevant, to me, is irrelevant. And then you say, well, what are we really talking about? And if you want to make this pretty and put a happy face on that, we can look at Fox News. There's media that does that all day, 24, and I like what he said, they dumb you down.
Well, I was just thinking maybe because Laurie didn't have a TV growing up, maybe you avoided being dumbed down in a more sophisticated way.
That's probably true. At the time, I didn't feel very comfortable, but I mean, I think that there is merit to this idea of being docile, and Marx talks about it being the opium of the masses, and the popular media has become that. So we all have this expectation.
Oh, the popular media is the new religion?
It is the opium of the masses, and that. It dumps us down for not thinking about like the real things that are going on. And what we do in contemporary society is, if we're confronted with an image of something that's real in a neighborhood, we just put a fence around it now, so we don't have to see it.
You contain it.
Yes, we contain it. And I mean, that's what we do with public housing. We've had this whole push of decentralization in housing, across the country. country. And I mean, what's happening in the city, I mean, we are in a housing crisis in the city. There's no doubt about it, especially, you know, it's now touching the middle class, so now it becomes important because it's touching the middle class. And we have 178,000 people in New York City Housing Authority, so in public housing. We have a wait list of 137,000 more people waiting to get into public housing. As of December 2009, we've completely dismantled the Section 8 housing program. You can't get a Section 8 housing voucher to go out to the private market and find a suitable apartment for your family. You can't get into public housing. You're going to wait approximately 10 years to get into public housing.
So what's the message? Leave New York? Is that the message?
That's the message they're giving you.
No, I mean, the real thing is we have public housing out there. We have 120,000 units of public housing that won't meet code. They need to be brought up to code. It's there where people want to demolish it because they can make more money if they bulldoze it than if they fix it. And so those are vacant apartments. We have at least 4,000 documented luxury apartments in New York City that are unoccupied. They can't be sold. They've been vacant for 6 months or more. So you have homeless people, and then you have peopleless homes, and it makes no sense. We have a housing problem because we're not providing that service of connection. There is enough housing in New York City. The people just don't have enough money to afford it. There are vacant houses. It makes no sense.
There was city buildings that were taken off the market for literally over a decade in anticipation of being able to sell them and get the prices that they wanted. I mean, there were houses...
Speculating.
Correct. There were whole buildings, whole neighborhoods where rows and rows and blocks of buildings were left to just rot and deteriorate when people were desperate for housing that was owned by the city of New York until they could get to a place where they could, quote-unquote, renovated this property and charge thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars per apartment. So this is not an accident. This is not a coincidence.
Well, we're drawing to the close of our show, and I want to thank you so much for coming. And to end on the note that you were talking about, I would like to post this and show it to economists, and I would like to invite all of you back that we could consider some of the economic paradigms that might actually shift this. You know, the question of how you said these people would like to wave a wand and make homelessness go away, but maybe it's only 1 or 2 people. And where is that change? Where does it start? That's because I think that's the magic that I've been looking for when I've dealt with very smart people who do address unutilized capacity, because that's what you're talking about, that the houses are there, but people don't have the money to live in them. So
we got money for war, though.
Yeah.
We can spend billions of dollars on that.
So this is Paula Gloria thanking you for joining me on this episode of Farther Down the Rabbit Hole with Robert Taylor, Laurie McNeil, and Netwood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
It's a beginning, you know.
Yes.
My hope was that